Good afternoon and evening for some of y'all. Welcome to today's College Sports Communicators Live webinar presented by our CSC U Committee. We are pleased to offer this session for all students, interns, and aspiring athletic communicators and young professionals on just what is College Sports Communicators and what is CSCU. So thank you again for joining us for this important discussion as we tell you more about our organization, College Sports Communicators, also known as CSC, our members, the CSC U Committee, and the benefits of being part of our ever-growing membership. As you guys know, CSC is the professional organization for all of those who are college sports athletics or media relations contacts, and the creative and digital athletic department members in the US and Canada, as well as those exploring the profession. I'm Brian Ogden. I'm Associate Director for Communications here at Mississippi State, and I'll serve as your webinar moderator today. We welcome some of our most involved CSC members as presenters today, and they're here to offer you their thoughts and expertise, as well as take your questions. We welcome those questions at any time. Just place them in the Q&A function on this Zoom, and you can use the chat function to comment, but please use just the Q&A channel for your questions. As a reminder, we're recording this webinar, and later on the CSC website and YouTube page, you can watch it as an on-demand session. It will also be offered on numerous podcast channels. Please invite your fellow current CSC colleagues to listen and watch the on-demand video. We got a lot to cover, so let's jump in and get started. We'll start out by introducing our guest panelists today. Let's start with Katie Gonzales, if you'll introduce yourself.
Sure thing. Thanks, Brian. And thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Katie Gonzales. I am our Assistant AD for Athletic Communications at Illinois Wesleyan University, a Division III school that competes in the College Conference of Illinois and Wisconsin. And I also serve on the CSC board, the D3 SIDA board, and I am the chair of the Academic All-America Committee.
Thanks, Katie. Caleb, if you'll go next.
Sure thing, Brian. My name is Caleb Garner. I'm the Director for Media Relations at Arkansas State University, where I've been for the past 6 years. We're in the Sun Belt Conference, Division I, and I'm pretty heavily involved in the CSC U Committee, have been for the last 3 or 4 years.
And last but not least, Amanda.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. I'm Amanda Phillips, she, her. I'm the Associate Director of Athletics Communications and Digital Media Strategist at Oberlin College. We're a small D3 in Ohio in the North Coast Athletic Conference. Outside of CSCU, I'm also involved in CSC Pride, which is super exciting as we're getting that going this year. And then outside of CSC, I also serve, in the lovely D3 life. I'm also the Assistant Women's Lacrosse Coach at Oberlin College.
All right. Well, as we were planning this panel, we kind of ran through a lot of different options, and we said, let's start out with sort of a town hall to let people ask questions, but with a little more structure. Let's cover what is CSC, what is CSCU, and kind of just a little bit of all of the different areas that the profession touches. So I want to get us going with just what is CSC. We can start with you, Katie. I know you've worn a lot of hats for the organization. You just kind of listed off some of the ones that you're wearing right now. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of maybe the history of CSC, kind of what it is and why it exists?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fun to kind of think back on the history of CSC and find new things that maybe you didn't know before. But CSC was founded in 1957 and is actually one of the oldest organizations in collegiate sports. So that's pretty neat that in the early goings, communicators felt it was really important to build this kind of group that would help each other, lean on each other, teach each other into what we know today. Obviously, it started as COSIDA, now is the College Sports Communicators. And that, I think, is what CSC is. It's ever evolving, and it's evolving to include creatives and understand that that's such a part of what we do in media relations, athletic communications, sports information, whatever the name of the title might be. I think it's rooted in so many basic parts. But the other thing that CSC does is helps provide, learning opportunities like this one, not just for folks with CSCU, but also those at different levels and stages of their careers. It also, I talked about it before, but the Academic All-America program, something in my mind that is the most prestigious honor a student athlete can achieve. And our group decides and votes and nominates and takes such pride in that. And we also advocate for each other. And I think all of those things are kind of the everyday parts of CSC.
Kayla, I'm going to turn to you for this next piece. You've been in CSCU since you were a student. I can remember when you were a student here at Mississippi State and you were going to the CSCU kind of conference. So as an alum of sorts of the program, kind of how did CSCU help jumpstart your career, and kind of why did you get back into it on this side of things?
So CSCU, one of the first, they called it camps back then. It was a 2-day crash course. It was in Annapolis, Maryland, when I think it was the year before I was a GA. And so about 2016, 17, something like that. It really just taught me kind of some things that I'd maybe not have known, or it gave me some resources and networking opportunities to branch out and think about other divisions as well. Like I've been in Division I since I was a student, and so to make connections with D2, D3, NAIA, JUCO, like that's really valuable, and it built relationships that I still have somewhat to this day. There's people I still work with, even on the committees or on the CSC U committee, that they were kind of leading in that camp session, and so as I've progressed the last few years, like I really love giving back and um, teaching younger people things that maybe I didn't know as a student. Maybe I want to see them be more prepared to take a GA position or to take a full-time position and be ready to just step in there and knock it out of the park. And so that's really kind of why I stepped foot back into CSCU.
And Katie talked about it a good bit there, how the profession has changed, and she's seen it change. Amanda, when we were planning this out, you kind of had the idea of let's talk about the different skills that people have as a progression of how the industry has changed. And so just can you talk a little bit about how the industry has changed over the years and how it's not really quite as limited as it maybe was when it first started?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started my career after I graduated, I was in a sports information office. And then immediately I went into an athletics communications office. And I think right there, just those two names, the way that we describe our profession has been part of this embracing this change that our profession is. I think we saw it when we transitioned from COSIDA to CSC and rebranded. It is much more than like we as SIDs, right, are much more than just information holders, right? We do the recap, sure, we do the statistics, but we're also in that multimedia department that is ever growing. Social media is only getting bigger, and we're only figuring out what more we can do with it. And frankly, I think we're still not even halfway with this transition in our field, and we're embracing, we're going from that hard copy newspaper. We've still got our legendary coach Don Hunsinger that comes in on Mondays to get that hard copy of the football scores from the weekend. But then we also still have all the students who they're not finding out any scores if it's not on social media, right? We're not doing any print media to pass out to our students. So it's really working. We're still in that transition period of, honoring the tradition that is sports information, but embracing this new age of multimedia that is ever growing, ever progressing. And I think, that's part of what is so, what makes CSCU so imperative to the growth of this profession. It's CSCU helps people who are new to the profession, myself, when I was first getting in, Caleb, everyone, it's opening people's eyes to what could be and what can be. And I think we've got a lot of steps to still climb in what we can explore and discover. But every day I'm seeing new content being pushed out and new ideas. And I think it's a really good way to, it's a really good example of how beautiful this profession can be and how far you can you can take it and run with it, how much it's changed.
Some of that change has been, like you mentioned, and even Katie mentioned earlier too, and I'll throw this one to you, Katie, just we've changed the way that we refer to the organization. We've changed the way that we refer to ourselves. What do you sort of consider the difference to be between maybe that pure sports information and athletics communications? Kind of where is that line? What's different about those two?
That's a great question, Brian. And I think of it in my current role. I'm in my 6th year at Illinois Wesleyan. I replaced someone who had been in my role for 35 plus years. So he was the sports information director. And in that role, he was faxing results to newspapers. I do not know how to use a fax machine. I don't know how many of us on this call do. But like some of those basic ways in which they were having to inform people of the sports that they were covering was so different. And I think that evolved, and to Amanda's point, we're evolving now in a different way. We're moving from, we moved from fax to email, and now we're moving from, email to digital and social. And I think it's just this continued evolution. But I also think the difference is, because of the technology in the more sports information realm, it was so much more about the writing. And that was such a big component. And I think it still is a big component, but there's so many different ways to storytell now because of all of these different pieces of technology and products and equipment and things that we now have at our fingertips.
I'd like to add oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I just think that storytelling is kind of that big key piece that we all come back to. Everything in some way ties back to storytelling. And with that, I'll let you go, Amanda.
No, I just wanted to add to what Katie said. I couldn't agree more. I think this evolution and the way that our industry has embraced these changes it's quite a testament to the longevity of this field, and that, a lot of fields, as technology has advanced, they have not advanced with it. And I think, sports communicators, athletics communication, sports information, whatever your department is called, it has advanced with that. And I think that's something very special and unique about our industry.
I'll turn now to a little bit more of kind of the buckets that we identified. I think an analogy I like to use sometimes, even with our students on staff, and I think Caleb's heard me say it before, is kind of if you think of like the old school sports video games and you have players that have ratings in all these different categories, right? Not everyone can be a 99 in everything, but we can kind of break the skills of an SID or a communications person down into these different buckets. And as we planned this, they kind of lined up well with that history of the profession. And so we'll just go at them kind of in that order. And since this all sort of started with people keeping up with stats, records, scores, let's start there and kind of, I'll throw it to you, Caleb, to open this up. What advice do you have for someone who is going to go in and do stats for a new sport for the first time that maybe they never have?
First advice is just take time to learn the sport. Like, Google is your friend. YouTube is your friend. There are resources out there that, I mean, we're in a NCAA live stats age more now than the old stat crew stuff, and it still is around until baseball and softball and a few other sports get elevated to the NLS. But still, take time to learn that new sport. Read, just do some research. Ask your coaches; they'd be more than willing to help you. I remember, I think it was when I took over cross country at Mississippi State, I had no idea what I was getting into. And so I just walked into the coach's office and said, "Hey, break it down to me like I'm 5. Like, just tell me what I need to know, explain it to me." And within 20 minutes, I was like a semi-expert. Like, I wasn't full-on expert, but I at least knew enough to be dangerous. Another thing is just there's rule books out there, the NCAA rule books out there. They kind of explain the why. Now there's some where there's a little bit of gray area where it's more of a discrepancy, more of a discernment, but for the most part, like, you can kind of learn the why of, oh, this is why this is an assist as opposed to not, as an example.
Okay. I think the next thing that kind of came out of that is we talked a little bit about storytelling briefly. The next piece became writing, and it's such a key element to everything we do. So, Katie, what sort of things would you say are steps that young writers can take to get more comfortable with maybe their writing style, or just kind of clarity and just that familiarity with doing it every single day?
Yeah, I think the first thing I always say is, I always ask, are you reading that? Like, are you reading what you're trying to write? Are you familiarizing with, to Caleb's point, cross country? There's, if you think about it right away, there's not a lot of ways to say how fast someone ran. So you have to get creative and you learn, the nuances, and you learn some of the sports lingo of like sports that you might not be so familiar with. And I think you can unpack a little bit there. I also think not only writing, but asking for feedback. So maybe, you're a student in an office and you're not publishing stories yet, and that's okay. But that doesn't need to stop you from trying to write a story. On a Monday, taking the football box score from Saturday and writing a story and asking for feedback and being open to that feedback. Because, sometimes we all start in different places with writing. I was a math major, right? Writing was never my strength in my early part of my career, but I had people that were willing to give me feedback, and I was willing to listen and take that and grow from that. And I think reading what other people are doing and looking for that and opening up yourself up for feedback is important.
And I kind of want to bounce off of that, like not only reading, but read good writing. Like the way to be a good writer, this was told to me as a student by one of my mentors was, if you want to be a good writer, read good writing. I have my favorite is Wright Thompson. Like that guy can write. Even though he went to Ole Miss, but nothing against the Rebels. He's a good writer. He wrote The Cost of These Dreams, which is a collection of long form stories, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. And that's really just a small part of it. But yeah, just reading good writing, that can go a long way to helping you become a good writer.
Katie, you said something I want to circle back to, and I'll let Amanda jump in and chat on this topic. But the importance of sometimes just writing for the practice of it, whether it's going to be published or not. But then further than that, the importance of criticism and feedback. And I remember Caleb was there with me when this happened. I gave a student back a paper that she had written for me with a bunch of edits on it. And she came back, put it on my desk, scratched out her name in the byline, and just wrote my name as a joke and said, "Here you go, you wrote it." But I think there is a lot of importance in being able to take that feedback and run with it. Amanda, where have you seen feedback play a role?
Yeah, I mean, I will second that. Writing is not my strong suit. I was a management major, so writing was not, you know, an emphasis on good writing was not a huge piece of my formal education. And coming, I had some great mentors at into my undergrad and my grad year, and being here at Oberlin, I've had some phenomenal mentorship and some phenomenal writers that work above me that have truly shown me better writing. I mean, I think if I read some of my early articles, I would have, I would have an aneurysm and have to rescind it, right? But I think when you talk about that piece of like being able to receive criticism, as a coach, I'm always telling my players, like, if I'm not coaching you, that's the concern, right? If I have nothing to give you feedback on, that's where we need to be worried, because that means there's nothing substantial. So when you're writing and you're receiving feedback as a young writer, I think no one is expecting you to have this phenomenal Pulitzer Prize, New York Times winning, background. But I think people are expecting you to be positive about your teams. Not every game is going to be a blowout win for your team. Not every performance is an all conference performance. But if you aren't able to speak positively on your teams, I think that's the biggest issue in all of it. I think it has to start with a confidence in your own department. Because, while we talk about this newness in media, I still hear that, if I'm putting out a soccer article, every single one of my soccer players are reading that. It's their parents that are reading that. It's prospective students that are reading that. Whatever you are writing, as with anything we produce, that's going right into the public eye. taking that criticism and taking that feedback, albeit constructive, that is as much teamwork as anything else. No one is going to give you constructive feedback if they don't think that you are capable of being a better writer, specifically in writing. And even as a general rule of thumb, no one is going to give you constructive criticism or feedback if they don't think you're capable of reaching those new levels.
And in a webinar about what is CSC, and as we're talking about writing, it would be a real shame if I didn't point out and mention the CSC writing contests every year. And there is a student-specific category there as well for those of you who are still students that are on this webinar. You can submit your best writing that has been published throughout the year, and that's where that feedback can come in and be really helpful, as maybe the full-time staff members and things at your institution can help you narrow down the best writing to submit for that category. I want to remind everyone again that the Q&A is open at any time. If you have any questions as we kind of move through these topics, feel free to drop questions in that Q&A session and we'll answer them as we go. But the next kind of evolution of the communications profession was then working with outside media, where we're not the only ones writing the story. And that looks very different at different levels all across the country. So I'll turn it to you to start this one again, Katie, but just when it comes to working with the media, that could be local media, that could be national media, that could be the local TV station, that could be ESPN. What are some of the differences in approach that you might have to take when you work with different kinds of media at different levels?
I think like anything, it's all relationship based, especially, for us, a small Division III school that is a mile down the road from a Division I FCS school that has generally a nationally ranked football program and things like that. We're fortunate that we have a tremendous local newspaper that still covers us. We have a beat writer for football. We have a beat writer for both basketballs. That's not the norm, as much as it has been in the past. But that paper's also gone from 4 sports writers to 1 in my 6 years at Illinois Wesleyan. And so because of the relationship I've built with Randy and our staff is built with Randy, we can anticipate what he needs and we can reach out to him. Before every season, we kind of talk about what he's going to look for, what he's kind of trying to prioritize that year. And that's in that one-on-one person you're dealing with every day. The national media outlets, it's again, communication, being very clear in, hey, what do you need from me? When I worked at Eastern Michigan and working with CBS or ESPN for football or bowl games or whatever it might be, they would have a ton of asks. But if you didn't understand what they were asking, then you weren't going to be able to fulfill and help them out. And so just being really clear in what each other's needs are and how best to transfer that information back and forth.
Caleb, you had mentioned in the kind of pre-planning call, the way that you go about maybe with pitching stories or how the words you exactly used were kind of being your own media for your department when maybe somebody wasn't coming out to cover it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, like even though we're Division I, we're in the state of Arkansas, we share a lot of bandwidth with our neighbors 4 hours down in the northwest part of the state over in Fayetteville. So they get most of the coverage, and a lot of times it comes from us. Like, even though we have our small local media contingent that are incredible, they're just really loyal. Like they're gonna cover you as much as they possibly can. A lot of times we have to do our own media, our own stories. Like, for example, we have our Hall of Honor induction ceremony coming up next week, and because our local newspaper has one person in the sports department, he's in 5 high schools also on that same night. So he can't do it all. He can't be 6 places at one time. But what I'm doing to kind of help him out, and it gives us some extra content on our website, is I'm writing a feature story on each of our 4 inductees next week and publishing them throughout the week. And I told him, I think it was yesterday at our football press conference, I said, hey, I'm doing this again this year. I'll send them to you and you can run them if you need some extra content. And he was like, thank you. That saves me tons of time. And so, like, just going back to what Katie said about like the relationships that you build, and kind of it's definitely two ways. And so if you help them out, they're going to go above and beyond to help you out down the road.
Amanda, I think you'll have a unique take on this next piece of this, because I think every coach has had a point in time where they didn't like something that a reporter wrote about them, and sharing the coach hat and the communicator's hat probably gives you a little bit of a unique perspective here. But how do you work through the reality that media have their own goals in covering your team, and you have your own goals in terms of generating positive coverage, and sometimes they don't always line up? How do you get them to line up as much as possible, and how do you work when they don't?
That's a good question, because that is something that I think every coach in every sport at every level has dealt with, is that there's some kind of result of a game that the media, external media has taken one way and they believe it should be portrayed another way. But as a an athletic communicator, as someone who's writing those stories for your coaches, for your team, for your fans, I think it goes back to always having your team's best interest at heart. I think it goes back to, our job is not to necessarily give opinions on the game. We can absolutely say it was a phenomenal, performance, or a stunning save, or however you want to describe, said action. But it's not for us to say, they could have played better, or they should have done this, or it was the wrong play call in the last minute. I think that's where, SIDs, we have a kind of like code of conduct, maybe unwritten, but it's kind of where these ethics come into play. And it's like, maybe I don't agree as a person, as a fan, with whatever the play call was, or whatever the result was, or if the other team was maybe a little bit gritty or dirty or whatever it might be. I think our job at the end of the day is to tell the facts and make it exciting, and make sure that it's written for your fan base. I think I see a lot of articles that are a tad harsh to their own athletes, and I think that's so unfair to the athletes. I mean, the time and dedication that they give to the college, the institution, to their team, to their teammates, and even to us in our own office. Think about how many times we're reaching out to these students to help us with a feature story, or help us with some social, or, can you help us, even having student employees, can you film the game for us? Can you do photos? Can you do broadcasts? Whatever it is. I think, if you don't love the way that a story is written, for as an SID, if you see a piece of media and you're just like, this is just so out of line and so unfair, I think you have to be honest with the source. I think it's fair to go to the source and say that you feel that this was an unfair representation of the team, but at the same time, you have to respect that they don't have the same loyalties and like ties to the institution that you and your office do. And I think sometimes it just comes down to like knowing those boundaries and doing the best that you can with truly what you can control in your own article writing.
And boundaries is a good point. We're going to get into some of those here as we move along. Before we do, we did have a question come in, and I think I'll throw this one over to Katie. But outside of just going to webinars like tonight or the annual conventions in the summer, how can the people watching this webinar get more involved in CSC or some of the committees? And kind of how could potentially student members get on committees or do projects with CSC?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one, wanting to be involved is half the part, right? I don't want to speak for any committee themselves, but I think, as long as you're part of a CSC member, on your institution's all-in membership, Barb would be able to speak to this more, but you shouldn't really have necessarily a problem joining the committee. And I think, CSCU might be a great place to help, be a voice that's going to help, like, what do people that are wanting to get in this profession want to get out of a CSCU program? I think that, we all want more information. And so if we get it from the source that we're trying to feed it to, that is helpful. We had a student that worked with us that stepped onto the Academic All-America Committee last year, and served that role. And so I think as long as you want to be involved, there's plenty of ways to get involved within CSC. And I would suggest emailing Barb Kowal or Bo. Either or would be great points of contacts, or any of us could help pass you along to that. But I think in addition to getting involved with CSC, also seeking out opportunities around you to meet other people within CSC. So, you know, if you are at a small school in Ohio and you haven't met Amanda, and maybe, you know, her lacrosse team is coming to play at your institution, maybe there's time to set up a time to meet with her before the game, or even chat with her for 10 minutes after the game. You know, and if you see Caleb and whatnot, I think being creative in the ways that you connect with people will certainly help.
And Barb did send over a note that, just a reminder, undergrad students, you can work on committees, like Katie has said. You just have to be a member. And even if you're not employed in an athletics communications office, maybe you're not a part of an institution's all-in membership, there are individual undergrad student memberships as well that can kind of get you in and get you started and get a foot in the door. I want to turn now a little bit to the more new era of college athletic communications, social digital media. We're talking graphics, videos, Twitter, Instagram, you can call it X if you want to. It all changes names every single week, it seems like. We talked a little bit, Caleb did, about kind of being your own media, but I'll go back to Amanda and then go to you as well, Katie, with this. How have maybe the smaller schools that aren't Division I, Power 5 institutions been able to utilize social and digital media to tell their stories to a wider audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you got to be creative, as with any way you're trying to tell your story. I think you know, working at a smaller school in a smaller market, we lean on our campus partners a lot and our own athletes to share their stories. We're sending out emails to coaches monthly. Hey, what are some interesting stories? What are your students doing? I know at Oberlin, we really pride ourselves in sharing the stories of our student athletes as human beings outside of their athletic achievements. I mean, we have so many incredible students doing incredible things that I can't even begin to describe because it's so cool, but leaning on them to help tell their story because they can do it better than we can. You know, we have different services that we try working with. We just launched with like FanWord, which is a really cool kind of like service that helps us put together articles and put together content in human interest stories at kind of a quicker pace since we're a smaller office. We've been really good working with our college and arts and sciences communications office, and they have been super helpful in, you know, sharing our brand, sharing our graphics, sharing our social, sharing our media. Because we don't have the big ESPN contacts. We don't have, you know, like a big SEC network that's covering us on a weekly, daily basis. So being your own biggest advocate and being your own number one fan goes a very long distance in sharing your brand story.
Katie, anything to kind of add to that?
Yeah, certainly. I think the social digital media, especially at a small Division III school, you know, we look at it through the window of recruiting, and the impact that it has on that. And so, you know, when we're looking at what's going to work for Illinois Wesleyan, it's probably not the same as what's going to work for Arkansas State. It's probably not the same that's going to work for you know, Michigan or name whatever school. And so I think being realistic with what our goals are, who we're trying to reach and how we're trying to reach them. And, you know, to Amanda's points, finding companies, pieces of technology that can make us more efficient in doing that. WePlayed is something that we just partnered with, and, you know, that's allowed us to do some different things there because it cuts our video streams for us and things like that. And so I think just finding that efficiency, but also recognizing that you're not going after the same that school X might be.
And I think that's a great point and a time to transition to the next segment, which is kind of the differences in expectations. And I've got a little bit of kind of a two-part question for you, Caleb, on this. We mentioned the digital and social side for recruiting, and there's sometimes this push that you have to always be posting, always be posting, always be posting. it can feel like you're just checking a box. Sometimes to Katie's point, what works at Illinois Wesleyan may not work at Arkansas State. What works at Arkansas State may not be a realistic possibility at school X because they don't have the same resources. So how do you kind of balance quality and quantity, but then also as you've worked across different levels and seen kind of those different staffing and expectations, how do you see those worlds working differently?
It's like Katie and Amanda said, it even at the group of five, still Division I, but group of five, mid-major, whatever you want to call it, level, it's creativity. I mean, we have one person in charge of graphics and video storytelling. Yes, we're trying to add to our staff here and there, but a lot of times I'm doing a lot of that stuff, a lot of that extra heavy lifting that a lot of higher resource schools may not have to do. And so, but going back to the quality over quantity, like if you're going to post, like for us, like make sure it's just not for kicks and giggles. Like you've got to make sure that it has an intent. Like if it's just this random thing that I'm like, well, why is this being posted? Like if I'm scrolling just randomly, it hasn't done its job. Like whenever we're strategizing what to post, like we're like, what's the reason for this? What's the audience? What are we trying to get out of it? What kind of return on investment? If that kind of answers your question a little bit.
I think it's a good point. There's always got to be a purpose behind everything. Amanda, you brought this up while we were planning. So we've talked a little bit about maybe Division I, Division II, Division III, but now as the profession has changed, we've even started to see things develop at the high school level. And you mentioned that you even had a former student that's now a communications professional at a high school. And so what can you tell us about kind of how things work at that level? Because again, it's different from the other areas.
Yeah, I mean, one of my students, Colin, he's working at a high school and he's doing some teaching and he's also doing sports coordination, sports information. And I'm learning a ton from him about, honestly, about what his needs are at that level and how that looks. And he just told me, they've implemented a ton in the past couple of years because of things he learned at the D3 level. And while, resources look different, budgets look different, markets look different, it's high school level versus college level. The needs of the students still are the same. We still need rosters. They still need schedules printed. They still need some kind of website to house all of this information. And they've even expanded to like media days, which are super cool. I don't know a single person when I was in high school that had a media day, but how cool is it that these kids have that now? I think, at every level, we're seeing this growth in the profession and this need for passionate individuals to be a part of this new storyline that we're all kind of telling. And I think it's really cool to see this kind of growth at every level. I know I come from an NAIA background, and typically the NAIA tends to look a little more like Division III with smaller offices. But the office I was in at the NAIA was significantly larger than any office in my Division III conference now. So we're seeing that narrative kind of shift from D1, the P4, the big schools. They've got the big resources and big offices, and that's just, while some of those facts may remain the same, we're not seeing that as, that positive correlation with division or level and funding and resources and benefits. We don't see that as much as we did before. And I think that is, again, emphasizing, the beauty of this profession's growth. We're seeing ways to tell our athletes stories and to highlight our student athletes, coaches, trainers, fans, etc. at every level, starting at the high school level, which is just, it's a good way for people who think they're interested in this profession to be introduced to the profession.
As we're getting close to winding down on time, I want to shift to kind of one final area. And I think it's one that's really practical and can really hit home for a lot of the people on this webinar as they're getting ready to either go into their first job or they're in their first job. And that is how do you, as we talked earlier about boundaries, how do you set boundaries and shift from the I'm a student in a student office to I'm a full-time employee? Sometimes in the same office where maybe you were peers with these people just months before. Katie, I'll let you kind of start with this, but how do you kind of assert full-time status and respectfully, politely make it clear that you're no longer a student?
I think it starts with the way that you choose to start it when you make that shift, right? I think, we've had a student worker that was a two-sport athlete for us then become our graduate assistant. And this was a big, point of our conversation in the throughout the interview process when she was trying to figure out if this is what she wanted to do. And it really we really focused on, when you sit down with your coach for the first time, you have to be prepared. Like you can't show up as a student athlete or as a student anymore, right? You have to show up as that team's primary contact and that team's, storyteller and with your ideas and trying to figure out what they're going with. And I think if you bring that mindset to that meeting, it kind of starts there. I think socially it can be difficult because, you may have been at the same places on the weekends as people that are now, students that you might be working with. And that's certainly a hard part too. But you also know where they are on what days because you generally have that schedule figured out if you're at your own institution where you went to undergrad. And so, maybe that's not the area I should go to on a Friday night and things like that. And so I think there's certainly some balance there socially, but also knowing that just because you're shifting doesn't mean you can't still be friends. That friendship just has to change a little bit in terms of, keeping it a certain level of professionalism with what your current role is and being clear in those expectations and having an understanding with your supervisor and what they're looking for as well and how that breaks down, I think is super important.
On the flip side of that, Caleb, there are times where it can be beneficial. I think a lot of times we think maybe, oh, I'm too young to be a mentor to someone else, but it can be beneficial that you have closeness in age or pre-existing relationships to kind of help bring along fellow students or fellow former students with you. And sort of how do you get into that and help people out without crossing that line?
Yeah, like when I was a GA at Mississippi State, like I had there were students under me the previous or that year or the years that those 2 years that I worked side by side with as a student the previous 2 years. And so like um just kind of still being able to relate to them and saying but like we're talking about the boundaries of letting them know like hey like when we're at this event like I'm I'm in charge like this is it's not just a hangout session like you can still be friends with them like you can still you know get to know them as people but also like have that ability to know when it's to let them know when it's time for business because this is a business um and because you never know who's gonna walk through the door. You never know if the AD is gonna just hang out in the press box all night at a tennis match. um and so it's just reminding them that I've been there before, I've been a student, let me help you, but there are boundaries. So
I think this is a good note to close on. I'll turn it to you, Amanda. But if I've heard all of you say it at multiple points in time tonight, the importance of relationships and just how this is a relationships business. And to loop this all back into what is CSC and kind of what is CSCU with networking, can you just kind of bring us home with the importance of relationships and how this organization exists to foster those?
Yeah, I think you said it best. This is a relationships business. This is quite literally a communications field. So that is the name of the game, if you'd say. Building those relationships are crucial. You're going to be working, in this field, you're going to be working with college age or high school age students every single day. And if that's not something you want to do, then or truly then this is not a field for you. You have to be able to build those relationships with student athletes and with coaches and people who are new to the field, and you have to be forgiving, and you have to be vulnerable to a degree. You need to be a human and be friendly. And I think, if you can master some basic communication skills, this is an industry that you can very quickly and easily fall in love with. I have yet to meet someone who is in this field who doesn't have, we've all got frustrations with any kind of career field, but the special thing about athletics communications is that we are all passionate about one shared thing, and that is sports. I've never met a not sports fan in this field. And I think that's fun that you can talk sports all day and be around people who are like-minded. With CSC specifically, being able to go to convention, that is a privilege, but getting on those committees and being involved in the organization one way or another, finding those group of people, there's not another college that's super close to me. So any of my good friends in the field are another state away or 2 hours down the interstate. So, you got to build those relationships because you need your community to lean on them. That's a huge piece that is just general advice to anyone, no matter what field you're going in. But CSC is especially great and can be so fulfilling for yourself and for others. I think it is, like Katie said, like Caleb said, like Brian, like everyone has said it so far, being a part of this community is a privilege, but it's a very special one. And I encourage anyone who's listening to, talk to their closest CSC member, talk to their director, find ways you can get involved, because there's always opportunity to get involved at CSC.
That's a great way to wrap this one up. So thank you, Amanda. Again, I'd like to give a big thanks to all three of our presenters today for the discussion, the insights on just what is CSC, and how we are all here to kind of help each other, but also with this group specifically here to help and assist the aspiring young professionals. Again, we hope that we gave you some information on how you can get involved with us, and it can help you network and connect with others and begin your career path. This webinar will be on demand tomorrow morning, and you can share that information with your colleagues. Again, we encourage you to check out our website, collegesportscommunicators.com, for updated information on what's on tap as far as CSC programming and continuing education and future webinars like this one. So thank you again for being with us today, and we hope you all have a good night.